gentlemen. The last time I had to give the talk on the same topic, they put my talk between Robert De Niro and Bianca Jagger. But this time between May Chen and Renee Lang, and I think you guys are better looking. Really, this topic was really chosen by May because we were talking about first thing which people notice when they see us, me, or anyone here is the skin color. And when I was discussing this with May, May said a lot of her work is actually based on dealing with people who have issues with skin. So what I'm going to try and do is give you some research and insights. Hopefully, it'll give you an understanding that skin color may be nothing more than figment of our imagination. So that's the book I've written on it. It's called Skin Biography. It was published last year internationally by Fourth Estate. After the talk, I might expect all of you to go to my website and buy a copy, sharadpaul.com. Just to make you feel a bit guilty, all the proceeds go to programs for low-rise house schools. Okay, because it's a short, sharp session, I'm just going to simplify today. It's just about 3 questions. So the first question is going to be, you can't see the screen here, so I've got to keep turning back. Why did Milka not win an Olympic gold? Now, who the hell is Milka? Now, Milka Singh is actually India's greatest athlete. It's quite an inspirational story. See, the last time I was in India to launch a novel, this movie, Bagh Milka Bagh, was the rage of town. Now, Bagh Milka Bagh in Hindi means run, Milka run. Milka Singh's family was torn apart during the partition of India and Pakistan. His entire family was slaughtered, and he only survived by hiding under the body of his mother. And literally after people had assumed that he had died, he basically ran all the way to India. And literally for the rest of his life, he ran and became India's greatest middle distance runner. In the Rome Olympics, he finished 4th, but the first 4 dipped under the Olympic record. So while he broke an Olympic record in his personal best, he was denied India's first ever track and field medal. So the point I'm going to make is there are other reasons why he didn't win the gold, and to do that I'm going to take you a little bit about my work. In my main job, I'm a medical doctor. I specialize in skin cancer surgery. I teach at the Universities of Auckland and Queensland. But I'm also an animal biologist, so when animals are injured in various zoos, they call me to go fix them or fix their skin. So that's me trying to tempt a lemur down with an apple. I can't remember if it was our zoo or not. But the story is the lemurs are interesting because you see the first apes came on Earth about 28 million years ago, and lemurs were precursors of modern apes, except they got stuck on Madagascar, which drifted away from mainland, so that's why there are no lemurs anywhere else. So the apes first arrived 28 million years ago, and see, the brain is all about movement, so the more you move, the larger the brain you need. Which is why movement for movement's sake, like yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, all help ward off dementia. Or we know from an evolutionary point of view that creatures who no longer need to move or become immobile after moving, they actually digest their brain because they don't need a brain anymore. So what happened is these apes started moving, walking upright, so they started doing more things. So the more they did, they needed a bigger brain, and the bigger the brain, you needed a bigger cooling system. So they started losing their fur. But when you lose your fur, and the African apes have pink skin underneath it, the skin needed to darken to preserve folic acid because we need folic acid to reproduce. So over 28 million years, the skin in Africa became black to preserve folic acid. So it is no accident that Asia and Africa have larger populations. It's simply because they're darker skin. Because if you have darker skin, light destroys folic acid. And if you have more transparent skin, you have less folate. So we did a study comparing a slum in Bombay with the wealthiest suburb in Belgium. And the slum in Bombay had 28% less birth defects with no medical care. So this was me operating. This is Mela, the orangutan of Auckland. So the funny story with this is half an hour after this, I had to rush back and operate on a lady's eyelid skin cancer. It's quite a complicated operation. And I was thinking to her, oh, if you look like me, you can't tell her where you've been because she's going to say, well, he trained in India and he's a monkey doctor. So what happened is these apes were in Africa, but the first man only appeared 200,000 years ago. And man then migrated out of Africa. Modern man, as we know it, Homo sapiens, 100,000 years ago. So when this migration happened and man moved out into Europe, the first thing happened is for 6 months of the year there was no sun, many parts of Europe. So what happened is the skin started to lighten. The reason the skin lightened is because you needed vitamin D. If you were dark, you couldn't absorb vitamin D, and if you couldn't absorb vitamin D, you develop rickets. What happens with rickets is it's a double whammy. On one hand, it deforms your skeletal system so you get bent over and stooped. But secondly, it makes you infertile. So if you're infertile, obviously you don't reproduce, and if you're deformed, you're less likely to be chosen. So from a sexual selection point of view, you got isolated. So funny enough, as time went on, the dark skin got bred out. But the darker skinned people in Europe were initially deceased because they were in conditions which were not optimal for their skin color. So which was why their height started decreasing, they got more stooped over, and the feeling of racial superiority came in. But what happened is, as these people migrated over to Asia, that happened relatively recently. For 10,000 years, people started migrating over, Indus, going into India, going into Southeast Asia. The skin was again light, and they were going back to the tropics. So the skin started darkening again to preserve folic acid. So when it started darkening again, this happened over a much shorter time frame. So I'm going to tell you what implications that had for our story with milk. So what happens is, if you think about it, all skin color is fundamentally a battle between two vitamins, folic acid and vitamin D, and the skin makes the referee. But Indian and Asian skin, because they came from a shorter time frame than the 28 million years, they didn't have time to produce a lot of pre-vitamin D. See, evolution is beautiful. So there's a word called satisficed, which means to be sufficient and satisfied. So basically, what we say is that evolution thought about it and realized that when the skin was dark, it couldn't absorb vitamin D. So the Africans have a very, very high level of pre-vitamin D. So to prove that, what I did is we actually did a study with people with black African skin. We took people with exactly the same color in India, let's say Sri Lanka. And what we found is the Africans had 4 times the pre-vitamin D level, even twice the European levels. And that's the reason why India won't win a track and field gold medal in the 100 meters, or even New Zealand can never do a first, second, and third in the 100 meters like Jamaica can. So, what I did at a previous talk is we actually predicted the world's population based on skin color and got it fairly accurate. Actually predicted the Olympic medals at London fairly accurately as well. So, now there's another issue with vitamin D deficiency. So virtually all Indian patients, and it's actually to go with a lot of Asian patients, especially the ones who don't eat a lot of fish oil, are all vitamin D deficient, because India has a large vegetarian population. So what happens is, if you're vitamin D deficient, eat a lot of dairy, which has a lot of calcium. As it is, when your vitamin D is low, your body is leaching calcium out of the bones, and on top of it, if you're taking dietary calcium or supplementing calcium without correcting your vitamin D, it straight away gets deposited in your arteries, and therefore increase the risk of heart disease and diabetes, which is why there's a big epidemic in India at the moment and in other parts of Asia. So the real reason Milka didn't win Olympic gold is he didn't really have enough free vitamin D levels. The second question I was thinking about is why or where was Charles Darwin wrong? So Darwin said this in his book Descent of Man. He said distribution of various colored races, most of whom have long inhabited their present homes, does not coincide with the corresponding differences in climate. See, he was wrong because what happened is, if you think about it, this picture shows an Inuit, an Eskimo, and a polar bear cub, and it's called the polar bear sun. One day a week, as some of you know, I don't work in medicine, but I teach creative writing in lower decile schools. So that's me teaching a bunch of kids and reading them the stories and copies and all these things. So one of the stories I was telling them was the polar bear sun story. Now if you think about it, the bears migrated with the humans. But what happens is, as the humans went into Europe, I just told you that their skin lightened. But the polar bears have very white fur because the ultraviolet rays are higher at the poles, but they have black skin. Why? If you shave a polar bear, it's jet black. It's because the diet was so rich in salmon, which had 1,200 international units of vitamin D per teaspoon, that it didn't need to lighten its skin. And guess what? So did the Inuits. So the Inuits as well are virtually human polar bears, and that's why the Eskimos are dark skin. So Darwin was wrong because Darwin's looked at the Aborigines and he looked at them and he thought, oh, you can have any color anyway. The Aborigines, we know, migrated 50,000 years ago across land to Australia, going through Philippines, South India, so we know that as well. So the third question is what is caste in India? Is a big caste. Is Varna or caste all about diet? But this is a very provocative question if you're in India, and I thought, okay, let me break down this myth. So part of this, I was speaking at a plastic surgical conference in Iceland, and then I hopped across to the Miss World competition purely for research. So if you look at this, you've got Miss Estonia and Miss Norway. Before I just educate you a little bit about the Baltic states, here Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, you've got the Baltic Seas. The Baltic Seas are a lot warmer in Europe, so the currents are a lot warmer. So what that means is, people traditionally, once they migrated from Africa, they could farm grain because the current was warmer. Whereas the rest of Europe, like Norway, all those were too cold in Iceland, so they were just eating seals and whales and all that because they couldn't farm. This was the only area where you could grow grass or you could grow plants. So when you farm, cereal, as you know, has no vitamin D. So if you would grow up cereal eating over time or a vegetarian not eating fish oil, not in your lifetime but over generations, your genes are triggered which lightens your skin. So if you look at Miss Estonia, you can see from a Baltic state and Miss Norway, you can straight away tell the difference in skin color. So if you look at in India, for example, the upper class Brahmins were all vegetarians. So if you look at over centuries, their skin lightened. And that gave the perception that if you were lighter, you were upper class. So to break down the myth, I actually did this. I took the Brahmins in Bengal, because in Bengal, the Brahmins in India eat fish, because they call it the fish vegetable of the sea. Compared it to Brahmins elsewhere, and their skin tone was darker. So basically what it means is, Varna or caste is all about diet. So lastly, one thing you must remember is all skin color of man, be it brown, black, yellow, white, all are made up of melanin. There's very little difference between carotenoids and other things. Fundamentally, the melanin determines all the skin color types, including in animals. And melanin is a relatively inert pigment. So it's actually amazing that one pigment causes all the colors of mankind. And what's amazing is, each of us has the same number of melanocytes. We don't even have one cell more or one cell less. It's how it responds to the sun, which is another story, is how our skin colors are born. So to say that we're all the same, we all have the same number of skin types, we're all from the same caste or lineage, so basically our feelings of superiority, if any of you think so, is really a figment of your imagination. Thank you.